Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Payments Leaders Show. I'm your host today, Adrian Evans, and absolutely delighted to welcome for the second time on the show, Grace Hayes. Grace, hi, how are you?
Hi, Adrian. It's very good to be back on with you today. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for taking the time. I know how busy your schedule is. Now, we know in the community here, the payments ecosystem, that it's an exciting time for the payments industry, and we're about working with leaders and engaging with leaders who embrace the opportunities before they embrace the challenges. Now, Grace is an EVP of technology at MasterCard, and absolutely delighted to say it's the second time back on her show. So I'm wondering if we could start with Grace. Tell us a little bit about your current role as EVP at MasterCard.
Yeah, sure, no problem, Adrian. So yeah, since I spoke with you the last time, I have actually changed roles, but
Yeah.
MasterCard has recently announced a realignment of its teams, really centered on three interdependent areas. So focused on core payments, commercial and new payment flows, and then our services.
Right.
All these changes will enable further alignment towards accelerating growth and delivering value for our stakeholders. And since we spoke last, I now lead the global market technology teams, which is really focused on delivering that value, but enabled by the overarching technology.
Right. Excellent. Okay. So, look, again, there's a lot of talk in the payments industry about payments becoming frictionless, etc. I prefer the term less friction myself.
Yeah.
What opportunities do you, at appropriate friction, it's very different for me buying an ice cream compared to buying something that costs six figures, etc. What opportunities do you see in the payments industry to reduce friction?
Yeah, it's really important that we're embracing the technology, really thinking about using like data-driven approaches, and collaboration is going to be key because we're all part of a bigger ecosystem. And certainly in the payments industry, creating that seamless experience for the user is going to be paramount. I think as well as that, when we think about the transformational changes ahead, okay, think about how we are reimagining money, new ways to exchange value back and forth, intelligent experiences that are cutting across, we see this more and more, cutting across the physical and digital environments. And then, really kind of thinking about elevating the principles of inclusivity, sustainability. It's really kind of putting all of that together, and it really is changing how we are designing, building, and delivering the products. But also on the back end, we're also thinking about how we as consumers, how our expectations have completely changed as well with a lot of these emerging technologies. And a lot of the collaborative regulatory engagement that we're seeing will also accelerate new payment kind of innovations.
Yeah. You talked there about, as again, from a consumer perspective, as well as obviously being in the industry, sort of reimagine and that almost merging between the physical and the potential. What do you see there? Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about what approach data can enable that to happen within.
Yeah, so I think, look, some of the trends that we're certainly seeing, now and kind of in the very near future is going to be things like, I suppose, very conscious consumerism, I think is one of them. So this is like where we've got a greater awareness of the near term. Okay, we want we actually expect accelerated momentum in very purpose-driven payment flows, right? As consumers favor businesses that really think about things like ESG and net zero. They're locally sourced, that operate ethically, and so on. And data will enable an awful lot of that, where we simply wouldn't have been able to get to that level of detail and so on before. Banks and merchants that demonstrate that they can align their products and services to those type of customer values will definitely outperform. And it'll really kind of evolve in, I suppose, in sequence with that conscious consumer. And that's very much driven by, I suppose, the opening up of different forms of data that's now at our fingertips to be able to I suppose, educate us within the larger companies and also as consumers where we can get this information firsthand. So I think that's one. There's lots more. When I think about some of the other areas, things like, data is now allowing us to, I suppose, I suppose there's a couple of different things, but the first one could be something like maybe, I'm thinking more around unleashing acceptance. So things like, okay, a couple of years ago when we were thinking about acceptance, there was certain elements that had to be in place. And in many cases, acceptance was only enabled by very strong data connectivity or whatever it might be. Okay. Yeah. Now, when we think about what that means, in the next few years, we can expect things like new iteration points to really think about the consumer experience and the implications from expanding financial inclusion to really being enabling large groups to access everything from like mass transit systems, stadiums, etc. Innovations and acceptance enabled by data and our ability to understand that data will really provide a cost-effective way for merchants to unlock that new revenue opportunity and then meet those kind of consumer expectations for speed and convenience as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. No, it's fascinating that you say that as well, because there's a couple of key points there for me. I think we forget how far we've come in the payments industry, even in the last 5 years. Contactless now, I can't remember the last time I had any cash in my wallet.
Yeah.
Now you date back that 5-6 years ago, it was pretty normal to have that. No supplier, never mind how small or large, for our family or for our business, would now wants to accept cash. And I just think that's only going to accelerate. It's fascinating to see what you're saying. It's interesting for me, for a number of clients and everybody I speak to at every conference I go to, the consciousness of the consumption and ESG are front and center. And I think you're right, banks and merchants have had to accept that as that's what's being driven by consumers. And we've got the data to now do that.
We do. And, for the first time ever, we are now in a position to be far more inclusive. There was so many barriers put in place through technology or lack of it or thereof. And we now have the opportunity to be really accelerate in terms of inclusive credit. So think about in the near term, really transforming the lives of those who are excluded and empowering those kind of global economic growths through banks or fintechs or other digital players, whatever it might be, to be much more equitable and inclusive around how they're providing those opportunities to credit that simply wouldn't have been there before, whether it was through technology or the amount of data to enable decision making and so on. So there's many different kind of very positive outcomes towards this.
Yeah, and I know MasterCard, it's one of the reasons where I like partnering MasterCard is because the financial inclusion piece is at the top of the agenda.
Important. Incredibly important. Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I'm obviously, in terms of the brand you built, in terms of how you conduct yourself, I've noticed that, and when we've partnered together, you've been the voice of the customer. I wonder if you could tell us more about what that means to you and how you've gone about that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always been very, very important from really, really early on in my career. And for anyone who knows me long enough will know that I'm always that kind of little bit of a conscience in the room. But for me, it's much more than just being the voice. It is really embracing what it means to have that voice in a room, in decision making and so on. So it's really in making sure that it's embedded in everything we do. So, I spoke earlier around the importance of the design, build and run of products and services and technology, but really understanding and really taking into deep consideration the impact they will have on the end consumer is hugely important. One of the things that MasterCard has been renowned for in its over 50-year history is that it's very secure, very reliable, building fast global networks that really do scale, minimizing the friction like what we talked about earlier, but it's allowing you more than anything to bring that really broad, more inclusive lens to any of those global solutions that you're building and really deeply understanding the impact that those have for the kind of the mass scale. One of the things I've found, and I'm sure others have seen this before, particularly if you're designing a product, you might have use cases or personas or whatever. I think that day is long gone. I certainly hope it is, because one size no longer fits all. We need to really, really think of a kind of global, scalable customer base. What does that look like? And how do you ensure that you're bringing many of those different lenses together and removing any of those maybe localization biases or design biases that you would have had over previous years?
Okay. So can we just go a bit deeper? Because I thought I'm just learning more here. It's in terms of, you've always talked about being the voice of the customer. And I always thought that was about being, that conscience in the room of actually bringing the customer perspective when people can merrily be going along, frankly, building a product and the customer's voice isn't being hearing. So what's the difference between a voice of a customer and actually then bringing that to life so you can take that to market effectively. What do you mentioned design as a core component of that as well?
Absolutely. And it's exactly what you just said. It's being able to bring it to life. So anyone can receive voice of customer feedback or surveys or whatever type of static data that you want. It's much more than that. It is really embracing and embedding it in everything that you do. And, I touched on understanding the impact. When you know your customer, when you really truly know what this product's benefits are, the impact it will have, how it's going to be used, that heavily influences how you design it for simplicity, easy connectivity, whatever it might be, depending with other products, whatever you're creating. That's a very, very different design approach, maybe from 10, 15 years ago, or maybe even sooner in some cases, where it was built for a very bespoke audience.
So this is I'm really curious about this. Is that at the heart of that design thinking? That actually, but it's what I call practical design thinking. It's too many. I think one of the criticisms of design thinking can be that it can look very theoretical, but the greatest practitioners I see of that actually are very pragmatic and bring that to life very easily.
Exactly. And, innovation is at the core of this. Obviously, the more innovative we are, the better our ideas become. We think very, very differently, completely outside of the normal boundaries that would have been set. So I do think that's a big part of it, design thinking. But there are a number of other, I suppose, structured tools and processes to try and bring teams along in this. But for most people, and I think we touched on this in my previous podcast, a lot of this comes from being curious in what you're doing, being very open to new ideas, not being afraid to challenge the status quo of things. All of that, to me, is why some people kind of refer to the voice of the customer in the room or the conscious, but it's that combination of, I suppose, that really deep emotional understanding of this is why we're building in a certain way and for a certain audience and the impact it has.
Brilliant. No, I love that deep emotional understanding. And you say going way beyond just demographic personas.
Yeah.
Wonderful. One of the key things that, and again, obviously, helping people in the payments industry is something that comes up regularly for me is the value of sponsorship and allyship. I wonder if you could share your view on the importance of sponsorship, allyship, and ultimately advocacy.
Yeah. I have always been a really very strong advocate for the importance of building, I suppose, really long-lasting relationships with all the teams and individuals that I get to work with. I suppose for me, it's all about that relationship. And I think that is where allyship and sponsorship stems from. It's not something where you can just, tap somebody on the shoulder and say, can you be my sponsor? It's very much, you really have to earn people's trust and respect. They need to be the voice for you in the room when you can't be in that room yourself. So it's really, really important. And for me, certainly over the years, it's actually become more and more important because I think as you grow in your career and certainly with age, you do have a greater self-awareness of what your own strengths are and where you need to develop and continue to develop. And for me, I'm a great believer in paying it forward. Certainly in the earlier parts of my career, I had amazing mentorship. But I think once you get to a certain point, mentorship is very important, but sponsorship and allyship, to your point, is equally, if not more important.
Sure. Okay.
And I think for me, because I really do kind of believe in paying it forward, for me, it's around unleashing that kind of power within the individuals, the inner confidence and the coaching right up to certain levels of the organization or within their own careers. And, for me, then when I think about sponsorship or allyship, that should come very naturally as people get to work with you, as they get to know you, as they understand what your own core values are. You will either align or you don't. But I think true sponsors are those who will, really put you forward when you don't even realize it was them. They're almost like the hidden cheerleader in the background for you. And for me, the other piece as well is I've always maintained, time is precious. Don't want to waste anyone's time or anything like that. But you would be surprised. One small act of kindness, a 10-minute conversation with somebody can lead to absolutely great things. So for me personally, it's really important that even if it's even just a moment in time that I can help somebody, that you're always trying to make yourself available if you can.
Wonderful. I often, just to go a little bit deeper there, Grace, I often get to distinguish between sponsorship and mentorship and even coaching. I'd love your view on the difference between those three things.
Yeah, well, I think we kind of touched on it before. Coaching is now I could be wrong, I'm not the coach, but in my opinion, it's very action orientated. It's very kind of deep understanding of what your skills are, where you have areas for improvement, what you want to work on, really give an honest, hard line feedback to open up that kind of self-learning, that self-confidence, what it is, what the individual's brand is, what they want to achieve, and so on. So it's much more, in my opinion, hands-on, really looking at what they need to do and how you can coach and lean them and point them towards that direction to unlock their potential. I think mentorship then is a little bit, and this is the two that I get confused more so, is around the coaching and mentorship. Mentorship is a little bit of that, but usually don't go as deep.
Yeah.
Generally, a mentor is somebody who can, sometimes within your company, or somebody that you've worked with before, somebody that knows you quite well, potentially have worked closely with you. They will have a certain maybe 10-15% high level view of your capabilities. They might have seen you in action before. They'll give you some nudges around where you should go, what you should do, and hopefully in some cases kind of, give you advice, like a sounding board for your own ideas, and really draw that out of you. But then for me, a sponsorship is very different from that. This, sponsors, and I am happy to say that I've often sponsored people, and you know what? In many cases, it's those that I admire most, regardless of level in the organization.
Right. Okay.
It really is people who I've observed myself firsthand making significant impact, or really standing separate from the crowd to do extraordinary things when they're not even being when they don't feel like they're showcasing for you. For me, sponsorship, it really is that voice, and I've said it before, that person who sees what you're doing, sees the value that you bring, and is willing to kind of mention your name if an opportunity comes up, or give you a sponsor if someone's asking for feedback on, observations of your performance or whatever it might be.
Wonderful. No, thank you. It's a consistent question, and thank you for bringing the clarity to the difference between each one of those roles. So moving towards the future, then Grace, where do you see the payments ecosystem if we step out to the end of next year, to the end of 2025? Where do you see the payments ecosystem evolving to then?
It's going to be busy. It's going to be broad. I think we're in, and we touched on this earlier, with the evolution of technology and really the speed of innovation that we're seeing coming out of the payments industry. There's so many different directions. But I think, for the purpose of this, there's a couple of things that are certainly top of mind for me. And, I've certainly observed it firsthand. So I guess the first thing is tokenization. We're seeing this in payments, very heavily adoption. It's not new, but it is extending the technology to cover more real world assets over the next 5 years that will transform how we really do conceive the value and what we use for payments. It's no longer, to your point, we don't talk about cash for many years now, but, even a physical card or whatever. So the result could be a much broader set of payment options for consumers. But at the same time, I think, whether it's banks or digital players or merchants or whatever, they're also going to discover opportunities to create business models around how do we exchange payments? Where is that value in the creation of these new flows? And I think tokenization will really be an enabler for that. So I think that's one of the key. A couple of other things then, because we touched on it a little bit before, and one of them is, I suppose for me, might be a little bit further out than 25, but certainly it's something that we're actively looking at, and that's programmable payments. Sorry. And this is where it's at the moment it's more kind of niche use cases, but definitely become much more of an industry norm. I don't know, the next 3 to 5 years, or certainly by maybe 2030, that kind of outlook. And this is whereby you're embedding messaging and other types of, we'll say, value-added services, such as, I don't know, cybersecurity or KYC, like know your customer type verification. And it'll really lead to much more intelligent and contextually relevant payment options. So the net effect of that will be significant reduction in things like operating costs for pre-processing or reconciliation or exception handling or whatever it might be. But also think about it, the improvements in things like speed and service, both for, we'll say, commercial customers, but also even then those new kind of consumer flows will be really interesting to watch. And then I'll just give one other example because it's quite close, because my own kids use digital wallets all of the time. They're teenagers.
Yep. Mine too.
And I do think, you know, really taking the concept of a wallet and really changing that up a little bit. So when today's mobile wallets, they store different types of tokenized cards and little components of maybe account information or whatever, think about what tomorrow would look like in terms of a super wallet, you know, moving beyond the single function app approach to become much more of, you know, a central part of your daily life. Yes. So think about, you know, the level of competition and regulatory oversight and all the rest of it. No one wallet provider is likely to dominate that, you know, when we really think about it. So banks and digital players, they're all competing in this space. They'll definitely advance, providing, you know, increased things for, we'll say, I don't know, utilities or whatever it might be, to give those kind of seamless experiences. But the delivering on the ability to give one wallet to manage everything, to me, sounds like a really fascinating way for the consumer to really use the concept of a wallet in a much broader development scope.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I just got the imagination and the mind is going just sending me off into different directions here. So I wonder if I could just sort of summarize our conversation. Would that be okay? Because there's so many points I think that have really come up. I think the first one for me has really been around the opportunity that data brings to reduce friction appropriately within across the payments ecosystem. And I use the term appropriate there. I think it seems very important, and the knock-on effect that can have in terms of inclusion. And inclusion at a global scale. It seems as if you're sort of believing that we've never been at this sort of point before, where we have the data, we have the technology to be able to do that on a global basis at scale, to get more particularly from a financial inclusion perspective.
Yes, absolutely.
I think the sort of next key point for me was about being the voice of the customer, but actually beyond being a voice, not just amplifying that voice about being in different rooms, but actually saying, how do we design that are human centric, in the sense of there's an emotional connection. We understand what that user actually looks like, rather than some creative persona, and we're just trying to fit that in. That seems to be vital about how you've taken that forward from your perspective. I think the core parts, I think was really exciting what you said, particularly about the difference, because it comes up so often for me, the difference between sponsorship, coaching, and mentorship. And I agree that, you know, for me, the coaching is about a deep dive into your strengths, your weaknesses, your plans about where you're going for the future, etc. Mentorship, completely agree about somebody almost being the guide and sort of taking you through that. But that critical component about sponsorship, where it's almost that hidden voice for you, recommending you for projects or recommending you for roles. But what I really like what you said there, it's earned. It's earned because people have made a significant impact beyond the day job, and it's actually been earned. But it comes down to the basis of relationship. And it does. I believe there's three core parts to any relationship: trust, like, and respect. And actually, you mentioned that the trust and respect are fundamental when you've been sponsoring people.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to really early on when we started talking about very early around, you know, building those long lasting relationships. It shouldn't be a fleeting moment of a 5-minute intro meeting. You know, it really does come down to that. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, just for my audience here, that's the one thing I would say to people as well, is people think, oh, they learn about sponsorship and they suddenly say, I need sponsorship. And it's like, okay, that's sort of not how it works. It's
it should be much more natural. Yeah, absolutely.
It needs to be naturally aligned, and it needs to start with relationships, like all things in life, really.
Yeah.
And then really excited about the future. The opportunities there, and I know MasterCard at the very heart of this in terms of tokenization, then in terms of programmable money, the possibilities to embed and make that intelligent finance almost seem the chance again to reduce transaction costs there for reconciliation, for acquiring a huge, and also then very much I think the place of a large digital wallet that is all encompassing, that's going to require collaboration, just like anything in the payments industry, because no single provider is going to provide that, but there's a place for everybody to enhance the customer experience.
Exactly.
Is there anything else you'd like to add at all, Chris?
No, I think it was great just getting the opportunity. We could talk all day about what the future holds,
Absolutely.
and I'm sure your guess will be as good as mine. But it's a very, very exciting time to work in payments. And I think the technology that we're seeing evolve from lots of different spaces at the moment is really going to help us, I suppose, think very differently of what payments were to us. You know, for any of us who's grown up in payments over the last, 20 years, I've never seen the acceleration of innovation like I have in the last kind of 2 to 3 years, and hopefully even further. So yeah, very exciting time to work in payments, and certainly when we start thinking about the future, it's going to be hold on to your seats type of career, I think, for the next few years.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Grace, for almost giving us a peer behind the curtain of us about what's going to happen in the payments industry over the next 3 years. Really appreciate your insights, and thank you very much. And I wish you well and continued success.
Great. Thank you, Adrian.